from WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington. Welcome to this special edition of the Kojo and WAMU show, the At-Large Candidates Forum. I'm Kojo and WAMU. Today we're joined in studio by 6 candidates running for an at-large seat on the D.C. Council in a special election 2 weeks from tomorrow on April 23rd. But before we meet the candidates, we should take note for a moment of why they're running in the first place and why we're gathered here for a special WAMU 88.5 forum. Last year, Kwame Brown, the chairman of the D.C. Council, stepped down from his position after pleading guilty to a federal crime. Brown left office only months after one of his colleagues on the council, Harry Thomas Jr., left his seat after pleading guilty to federal charges. Brown's departure set off a string of events that eventually left open an at-large seat on the council, hence the special election on April 23rd. The turnover also opened up a flood of new concerns about whether local government in the nation's capital is an ethical enterprise, and the degree to which voters in every neighborhood of the city can trust lawmakers are doing their jobs for the benefit of their constituents and not themselves. As such, the first hour of today's conversation will focus completely on issues related to ethics. Joining me to direct traffic and ask questions is Patrick Madden, a WAMU 88.5 news reporter who covers politics. Patrick, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Kojo.
You can participate starting now by calling 800-433-8850 or by emailing your questions to kojo@wamu.org. You can tweet us at Kojo Show or post questions to our Facebook page. While we will not be keeping an official clock on the answers of the candidates, we will ask each of them to respect each other's time and to keep their answers brief. And we will remind you that speaking the longest, speaking the loudest for that matter, does not translate into winning or performing best in this forum. So allow me to start by introducing each of the candidates in the order in which they're seated around the table. Anita Bonds is a member of the D.C. Council, one of the candidates for the at-large seat up for election. She currently holds the seat. Anita Bonds, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Sitting next to Anita Bonds is Paul Zuckerberg. He is, of course, an at-large candidate for this race. Paul Zuckerberg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kojo. Thank you for having me.
Also with us, former Loose Lips Elissa Silverman running for this seat. Elissa, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Kojo.
Perry Red, he is the Statehood Green Party candidate. Perry Red, thank you.
And thank you, Kojo.
Patrick Mara is the Republican candidate for the D.C. Council in this race. Good to see you, Patrick Mara.
Good to see you, Kojo.
And, of course, Matthew Fruman, last but not least, is a Democratic candidate for the seat. Matthew Fruman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having the forum.
As I said, we'll take your calls at 800-433-8850. We'll pretend that Bruce Johnson is not in the studio with us, even though he's standing right there. A few weeks ago, council members reprimanded one of their own, Jim Graham, over concerns that he improperly mixed his council duties with those of his former position on the Metro Board. Graham has not been charged with a crime, and he has said repeatedly that he was only guilty of horse trading, something everyone does without getting too far into the weeds of Graham's case. Where do you draw the line between horse trading and unethical behavior? And as a council member, what standard do you think you and your colleagues should aspire to when it comes to ethics? Did they meet it in the Jim Graham case? Starting with you, Elissa Silverman.
Well, Kojo, I've been very clear on the record about this, which is that I think the council should have censured Councilmember Graham. I think reading the investigative reports, it's very clear that there was that Mr. Graham used his position to meddle in contracts. I think that's wrong. I think that ethics is a platform that I have in this council race. It's one of my 3 principles: ethics, accountability, and making good investments in our city.
Do you think the punishment could have been more severe?
I think it should have been stronger. Yes, I think that the council should have censured Mr. Graham, and I think that we need to take a strong position because I think the public trust has been broken. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing in our city is that the public trust has been broken and we need to restore it. We need to have confidence that when council members are making decisions, they're making them on behalf of the people and not special interests, not developers who might have contributed to a council member's campaign or to others who who have special interest down at the Wilson Building. The pay-to-play culture, I think, has to stop.
I'm not going to be necessarily asking each candidate to answer each question. If a candidate feels particularly strongly about an issue about which you have not been asked, please raise your hand and I'll try to recognize this. Also, Patrick Madden, you can jump in at any time. But same question to you, Anita Bond, since you have been sitting on the council for a little while. Have you experienced any of this yet?
In fact, I was one of the council members that voted
for censure.
Yes, that is correct. We voted because we felt that Councilmember Graham went a bit too far. There is something called horse trading, but when you get into the weeds and you actually indicate to one party that if you do this, then I'll do that, then we think that's going too far. And that's where we took issue with Councilmember Graham and his behavior.
Anita, if I can just follow up, because it's part of this is also contributions from developers. I know, I think it was March 8th, your campaign or your council office put out a newsletter where you talked about how you co-introduced a bill that would ban contributions made by limited liability companies. These are sort of subsidiary companies that business folks, developers can often use to make multiple donations. 2 days later, though, your campaign finance report came out, and it showed thousands of dollars in campaign cash, including at least a half a dozen of these LLCs. So on this question, which position do you take on these limited liability companies? Do you take the one in your newsletter or the one in your campaign finance report?
Well, you know, limited liability companies are entities. The problem is that we currently are not required to disclose the ownership of these liabilities. And I'm comfortable as long as the ownership of these liability companies is disclosed. And so I'm very happy to provide that information because it's not currently required by law, but I think we need a law that does require that.
Patrick Mayer?
Yes, thank you. With regard to Councilmember Graham, I represent Ward 1 on the D.C. State Board of Education, so we have the same constituency. I did send out...
Get closer to your microphone.
Pardon me. I did send out, I was the first candidate in this race to send out a release stating my strong concerns. I believe what should have happened, I believe we should have had a hearing. We missed an opportunity to really test ethics reform. I think, as happened, I think probably he should have been censured. But I also believe that he should have been stripped from his committee chair, but then all his committees, and then we would have set a precedent for ethics reform, because it seems to me to a certain extent we swept it under the rug.
He is your council member. Could you vote for him again for re-election?
I did not vote for him last time.
Well, you are... Wait, there are several people who want to respond to this some more, but Perry Red has not had a chance as yet. He is the statehood Green candidate.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, Kojo. This whole thing, I don't do dancing. I'm a songwriter. And so this whole thing about LLCs, it sounds like Mitt Romney. You know, corporations are people, my friend. And we cannot allow that. And that's one of the reasons why, as a party principle, DC Statehood Greens do not take corporate donations, nor do we take donations that are bundled. Those kind that come from corporations disguised as people. So what we want to do about that is, if indeed we're elected on April 23rd, to implement what we call an open source solution, where you're able to see every phone call we make, every meeting that we have, every dealing that we have as council, and it's transparent and accessible to the people, either online or they can go down to 441 to view it in a platform there. Something different, something right.
I don't do dancing. I'm a songwriter. What's
sure.
That?
Well, yeah. Councilman Bonds talked about the position. Well, Patrick alluded to the position on one side, and then we're seeing something different. And so we have to be consistent on the council, and that's one of the things I look to do, is to gain the confidence of the people and not dance around the issue.
Okay. Here's Matthew Fruman.
Yeah, the kind of horse trading that was at issue here, we can't tolerate that, both as protecting against corruption and protecting against the perception of corruption. We really need to build people's confidence in our city government, and it is down, and this is an episode that keeps pushing it down. Now, one of the things about this is the council approves contracts over a certain size, and that is a kind of attractive nuisance. It invites the kind of horse trading that you had here. It invites a tendency to favor political contributors. I think we need to move away from that. I think we need to pass the pay-to-play legislation that Attorney General Irv Nathan has come forward with. Let's take bold steps to show that we're not going to tolerate this kind of thing.
You want to get
forward.
the council out of the business of approving contracts completely?
I like oversight over the contract process, but not the approval of the large contracts.
Just in case you're just joining us, this is a special WAMU 88.5 production of the Kojo and WAMU show, in which we're talking to all of the candidates for the at-large seat on the DC Council in the election later this month, and our co-moderator is Patrick Madden. He's a reporter for WAMU 88.5. We're taking your calls at 800-433-8850, or you can send email to kojo@wamu.org. We haven't heard your voice yet, Paul Zuckerberg.
Thank you. I'm Paul Zuckerberg, and I find that Councilman Graham's explanation that this is just business as usual in the council is more telling than anything else, because it is business as usual. We have lobbyists outside the council, we have lobbyists inside the council, and we have money from lobbyists and developers controlling the agenda at the council. I believe if you are a lobbyist or if you represent someone who transacts business with the District of Columbia, you're not qualified to sit on the council. I am the only candidate who's actually running on a platform that's against his own personal interest. My livelihood is defending people on marijuana cases, and if elected, I want to decriminalize marijuana. I want to put myself out of business. I'm not running on my own personal interest, but for what's good for the citizens.
Allow me to go to the telephones. Here is Jared in Washington, D.C. Jared, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi. I just had a question with regard to all the candidates, open to all the candidates. And what I wanted to know was where each candidate thought the distinction lies between playing politics and crossing the ethical barrier. Because it seems to me that a fundamental element of the political game and political game theory is having clout, and part of that is participating in the favors game. I'm not a politician, but I am a graduate of GW and have a degree in political science, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois. So, that may be just from where I'm coming from, but where does that distinction lie?
Elissa Silverman, where does that distinction lie for you? Jim Graham said that, look, I didn't do anything illegal. Where do you draw the line between playing politics and outright unethical behavior?
So, Kojo, I think that this LLC issue is a clear distinction between the candidates. I know, I'm sure listeners are wondering, well, where are the differences? We are looking for people to lead reform efforts in our city and to restore confidence in our government. Now, I have taken a pledge not to accept. I was one of the leaders of Initiative 70, the grassroots effort to ban corporate contributions in our local politics. Both you and Patrick covered that issue very thoroughly, and I thank you for it. And I think it demonstrates my efforts to be a leader in reform, in that I was involved with Initiative 70. I feel very strongly that money is part of our problem in local politics, the role of money in politics, and I've applied it to my own campaign. So I'm not taking corporate money. I'm not taking PAC money either. And I think that says something about someone's leadership skills.
Patrick.
And just to follow up on that, Elissa, what about donations directly from the developers themselves, the individuals? I know Neil Albert has given money to you, Sinclair Skinner, who's done contracting work. Is that then a double standard? Do you draw a line there?
No, I don't think it's a double standard. I think we have very polarizing debates in our city that we need to get beyond to move forward. There's debates about the war on cars versus the war on cyclists, and about developers and anti-development. I don't think those are constructive debates. I think we need to move forward as a city with sensible, reasonable policies. I've received, my deep-pocketed contributors are of many stripes. They're from all over the city. They're from every ward. There are people in Ward 5 from Miriam's Kitchen. There are lawyers from the Washington Legal Clinic. And yes, there are people like Neil Albert, our former city administrator. And you know what I think is interesting, Patrick, and of course what's odd for me to be in this race is that many of the folks who've contributed to me, I've covered as a reporter. And even my chairman, Kathy Patterson, the former Ward 3 council member, said that sometimes I didn't write the most flattering things even about her, but I was always fair and
But
accurate
what if
and
somebody
honest.
like Sinclair Skinner, who makes a contribution to you, is coming as the head of a company after, if you were to get elected to the council, he's coming and he does business with the city, he has a contract with the city. How would you act in that situation?
So here's what I think is really interesting about the Sinclair Skinner contribution, Kojo, is that I was the first reporter to write about Sinclair and to write not flattering things about Sinclair either. And when I received that contribution from him, because I get a little indication on my email, I wrote to Sinclair and I said, Sinclair, why did you give me a contribution? And he said, look, I want district government to move forward, and you have always been fair and accurate and honest, and your agenda has been a reform agenda to improve district government, and that's my agenda too, and that's why I'm giving to you.
But you didn't answer my question.
I think I answered your question.
If Sinclair Skinner's company applies for a contract that the council has to approve, how would you act in that situation, given that he's a campaign contributor of yours?
On the merits, Kojo, I mean, I have been a data-driven person, an information-driven person. I think I've been on your program as an analyst before, and I've always approached everything through information and data, and that's how I would be as a council member.
The council did move last year to pass a so-called ethics reform bill. Since you're getting ready to speak, Paul Zuckerberg, what did you think of it? What do you think it says about the council's ability to police itself?
Well, the reform bill was totally toothless, and it's irrelevant because it doesn't get to real reform. But I just want to say, because this has come up several times, my signatures were challenged by Miss Silverman. Across the table from me at 4 hearings was one of the largest corporate law firms, an LLC, which must have donated tens of thousands of dollars to Miss Silverman's campaign. That's not on any of her financial disclosure forms. That's probably the single largest corporate contribution or LLC contribution in this campaign was accepted by Miss Silverman from this law firm. And I wonder, and this law firm's a firm which transact business and lobbies with the District of Columbia on behalf of its clients. So really, it's disingenuous to say you don't accept corporate contributions when you've accepted more.
I'm going to have to ask Ms. Silverman to keep her answer brief because she's already dominating too much of the conversation.
So, Kojo, let me address this challenge issue, which is that the challenge was actually made by a supporter of mine, and I checked with the Office of Campaign Finance, and my campaign actually could not, under our rules, under our campaign finance rules, pay for that.
How much legal work did it do for you? How much? Give me the dollar amount of the legal work that LLC did for you, and that you accepted
in 10 words or less.
And never disclosed.
And if you check with OCF, Paul, and my campaign did, we were not allowed to pay for it. I was happy to do so.
Did you disclose it?
Allow me to move on. Here is Neil in Washington, D.C. Neil, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking my call. My question is directed towards Councilmember Bonds. You work full-time for Fort Myers Construction. They're one of the largest contractors to the city. My question is, do you recuse yourself from votes, budget issues, and lobbying fellow council members on every single thing concerning Fort Myers Construction?
Anita Bonds.
Firstly, I am on a leave of absence from Fort Myers, but since I have been on the council, anytime anything has come before me related to Fort Myers, I have reclused myself, and the votes of the council will indicate such.
The question, of course, is likely to come up later, so I might as well ask it now. If you are elected to the council, will you quit your job?
Yes.
Unequivocally.
Unequivocally.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
All of that.
Let the record show.
Please let the record show. I have said it a number of times, and just doesn't seem to resonate.
You seem to have a question,
effectively.
Patrick.
Oh, I just wanted to pose the same one to Matt over there, because I know you've been asked that before, and I think you self-described the answer as murky. So can you describe your outside
This
employment
question
situation
from Matthew Fruman.
and what you will do
Yeah,
if elected?
when I started this campaign, first and foremost, I'm a dad, and I was trying to think, how do I make sure that I have maintain all of my relationships? And I thought, well, I want to be able to look to see after the election how it can operate. I would never tolerate a conflict. I would never tolerate being in a position where I couldn't give my all to this job. Since that has happened, I've gone back, I've talked to my colleagues, I've told them I will unequivocally not go back to my work, not have any association with my law firm should I win this election. So I will not have any kind of outside affiliation. I do, though, want to go back to the question that was asked before about where's the line that you were talking about, and others have commented. And the line is, what is the public good? If you get yourself into a situation where you may be favoring someone, either because their LLC gave you a contribution or they as individuals or groups of individuals gave you a contribution, then you're over the line if you're favoring those people. And if you get yourself into a position where you're compromised like that and you're describing it in the press as horse trading, you're way over the line. So we need to get at this, but just banning LLC contributions doesn't do it for the kinds of reasons that you raised. You need to have an eye on what is happening with the individuals as well, which is why the bill proposed by the Attorney General, which gets at contributions from contractors and potential contractors, does a better job of protecting us going forward from the kind of pay-to-play culture that we've suffered from.
Neil, thank you very much for your call. Patrick Mara, I have said in the past that there seem to be some former members of the council who joined the council because the salary provided would provide them an upgrade in lifestyle because they couldn't really do any, or they didn't really have any other jobs. And now we're involved in a debate of whether or not people should have outside jobs at all. What's wrong with having an outside job if you're on the council?
Sure. I mean, I've always said that being on the council, it should be your full-time job.
Why?
And I will treat it as that. It's a citywide. First of all, particularly when you're an at-large member, it's a citywide position. You need to get around to all 8 wards just about every day of the week, if not every day of the week. And I do not now know how an individual would have time to do some type of other employment opportunity. One of the things that's deeply concerned me about those other employment opportunities has been when they are with contractors that do business with the District of Columbia. I've also seen issues where you know, even now, everyone is now saying that they're not doing outside employment, but at the beginning of the campaign, they were saying they were participating in outside employment. So we see this over and over again, where a group of people who are running for an office say, I'm not taking outside employment, and then it comes time for their job on the council, and what do you know, they're taking outside employment.
And Pat, just to follow up on that, what is the status of, I know you have a consulting firm, a lobbying firm?
Yes, so I have I have not done any government affairs since 2008, but then I was a consultant to some small businesses outside the District of Columbia.
And can you and before that, you were a lobbyist on Capitol Hill.
I did government affairs on Capitol Hill from 2001 through September 30th, 2008.
Perry Red, why would you not keep a separate job if you were allowed to serve on the council? Allow me to underscore the point I made earlier. If this is your only job, your only source of income, some people will say you'll do whatever is necessary to protect it, including taking money under the table and anything else to protect it, because you don't have any other way of making a living.
First of all, let me say this, that since the beginning of the campaign, and Patrick Mayer made a great point, that at the beginning of the campaign, there were different positions. This is what I alluded to earlier about dancing, because that's what we're doing. And you obviously you have some power to cleanse the spirit here, because a lot of positions are changing right here at this table. So I've said since the beginning of the campaign that Washington, D.C. has the second highest paid city council in the country. And if indeed we won't pay our city workers a living wage, then why would we even consider allowing city council people to hold a second job making well in excess of $125,000 a year? Okay, the median household income in the city is $61,000. The poverty line is $22,000. We won't even pass a living wage in this city, and we're proposing through the Large Retail Accountability Act living wage orders. Living wage of $11.75. 75. That's just so that it reaches the poverty level. So, like President Obama did last week, he said he'd give back 5% of his salary to stand in solidarity with those who've been suffering from the sequester. I am the only candidate who committed from the beginning of the campaign to take a part-time salary for this part-time job.
800-433-8850 is the number to call. In case you missed it earlier, you can send us a tweet at Kojo Show, or you can join us on our Facebook page. You can also go to our website, kojoshow.org, to ask a question or make a comment. Patrick Merrill, last week, Washington City paper Loose Lips columnist Alan Suderman wrote that in 2008, business interests were eager to get rid of former councilmember Carol Schwartz and threw their weight behind you in the primary when you defeated her. What would you say to that? Is that a correct statement?
I would say the correct statement is, I was focused on education reform and school choice. I went around and I knocked on 8,000 doors in a primary. No one had ever done that before, from just about 3 o'clock every weekday afternoon to about 8 o'clock in the evening, and then on the weekends from 11 to 7 o'clock. And I had a conversation with voters. Basically, the only other person who had visited these folks previously would be former Mayor Adrian Fenty, and we talked about education reform. We talked about DC public charter schools, and we also spoke about the Opportunity Scholarship Program, and that is what put me over in that primary in 2008.
The perception that follows from the assertion that I made earlier, or that the assertion that others made, is that you should be seen as the business candidate in this race. Are you?
I don't think so. Obviously, I'm very pro small business because entrepreneurship is something we should be encouraging in the district. As you know, we're number 51 according to some indexes, which is not good when we have 50 states in the union. But I'm endorsed by the DC Sierra Club, the current newspapers, the Washington Post. So I have a wide range of organizations and individuals who support me.
Patrick Madden?
And Pat, obviously you've earned a slew of endorsements, but you've been criticized because of the R next to your name, right? Because you're the Republican in this race. So, question for you: how are you different from the National Republican Party? Where are the specific differences that you have with them?
Thank you for that question. Well, as you know, I'm socially progressive, fiscally responsible, moderate. I came to D.C. to work for the late Senator John Chafee, who's of that Rockefeller Republican breed. And, I was leading the fight on marriage equality on the Republican side several years ago. I was the only one in this entire room right now who testified before the D.C. Council. And I was the only one advocating for Congress to leave marriage equality through to people who are among probably the most conservative members of Congress in America. I've also been up on the Hill, fighting for voting rights, statehood, budget autonomy, and I've been meeting with the key players that nobody else is meeting with. And I think for our purposes of really making ourselves not second, third-class citizens in the District of Columbia, we need to have some form of engagement that isn't necessarily a protest, because you'd be amazed at how on either side of the aisle there's just a complete lack of awareness of what our situation is in the district. And we've actually, in the DC, in the local party, we now have marriage equality in the party platform. We have full voting representation in the party platform. So we are really creating an urban model for the nation. And we're the type of more of a progressive Republican Party.
In case you're just joining us, this is a special edition of the Kojo and WAMU Show, talking to all of the candidates for the at-large seat on the D.C. Council. We're talking with Anita Bonds, who currently holds the seat. She's running as a Democrat. Matthew Fruman is running as a Democrat. Patrick Mara is a Republican candidate. Perry Red is a statehood Green Party candidate. Alyssa Silverman is a Democratic candidate, as is Paul Zuckerberg, all running for the at-large seat on the D.C. Council. You can call us at 800-433-8850. It's not like the council or the D.C. government is playing with monopoly money, and not all of the ways the city distributes that money on programs are easy to follow. Harry Thomas Jr. was caught embezzling money earmarked for youth sports programs that went through the public-private Children's Youth Investment Trust. This is an organization that's been responsible over time for more than $100 million of public money. As a council member, what do you think will be the most important aspects of your job when it comes to oversight of the money, and what policies do you think could be put in place to guard against the creation, well, of slush funds, Alyssa Silverman?
Well, I think the major role of the council is oversight. And, I'd say of the candidates sitting here, I have been the one to drill down into the budget and take a look at how we're spending our money. Before me right now, as I'm showing to you and Patrick, is something that I worked on that I think Patrick reported on, which was a workforce development map. This is a map of where we spend all of our dollars on job training. And, what do we know? Well, we spend a lot of money and we don't have good outcomes. And I think the role of the council member is really to press the agencies on why are we not getting better outcomes? How can we shift our dollars to get better outcomes and repeat and pull information and data to improve those outcomes?
Anita Bond, same question.
I'd like to add to Alyssa's opinion here, because it's more than just doing the due diligence and looking at the budget and looking at numbers and talking to the administrators. It's also about talking to the recipients of the services and talking to the community. You'd be surprised at what community thinks we ought to be doing with the budget and how we should spend the money. And it's not always the way it is perceived. For instance, when you talk to senior citizens, they want relief. They want relief. Those who are taxpayers, they want to pay less or not at all, particularly if you're 80 years or older and you're still, having to complete your so-called personal income tax. And it is also a situation where you have our young people who really feel that they become the throwaway persons in our society. And when you talk to their parents, they're wondering, how are we really going to improve things? Well, talk to me and get some opinions from me, a parent who is here every day. It's our pocketbooks that make a difference. And so I just think we have to look at this role of a council person a little differently. In modern society, it's more than just the numbers. It's more than just the data. It is also about the human side of the equation. We represent people. We're elected people. We're not elected by the numbers. We're elected by the human beings.
And just to quickly follow up, Anita, would you bring back the earmarking system that the council used to have, and that caused a lot of controversy?
It caused a lot of controversy, and no, I would not bring that back. I think that there are some new systems that we can put in place. I think when citizens talk, when citizens speak at forums, etc., I think we have to listen more. For instance, we'll always get be besieged with, lobbying by community on any particular issue. But I really think when you go around to the community and you start talking about a subject that you may want to discuss, suddenly you'll discover, well, everyone is concerned about speed cameras.
Matthew Fruman, what use do you see for, and you can add whatever you wanted to say before, but what use do you see for constituent service funds?
Okay, but I did want to chime into this debate because oversight is the absolute key, and frankly, I think I've been involved in both sides of the coin that Alyssa Silverman and Councilmember Bonds are talking about. In my world of advocacy around schools, we did the Wilson modernization. We dug into every aspect of that modernization, looking at the plans, looking at the costs, working with the teachers, working with the students to try to figure out how we could do this best, how it could work best for the school, the city, and the community. Same thing on school budgets citywide. Mary Levy is a bigger expert on school budgets than I, but I would posit there aren't that many other ones who are that much more of an expert. You need to dig in. You need to be talking with people on all sides of it. Constituent service funds can play a role in meeting the needs of people in the greatest need, but to the extent that they become or appear to become slush funds, we shouldn't have them. If we're going to have them, Every donation needs to be transparent. Every use of the money needs to be transparent, and the money needs to be limited just to things like paying utility bills for seniors that are having trouble, never tickets and things like that for athletic events.
Perry Red, you wanted to say?
You know, I proposed when indeed we're elected on April 23rd an open source solution, and that would make transparent and accessible all of our the council's work, whether it comes to contracts and grants, whether it comes to constituent service allocations, because I'd like to bring that back. You know, I think it's a moratorium on it or something like that. But the chief mechanism for ensuring that the council people do the right thing for the right reasons is that what we plan on doing is having citizen-led legislative drafting, because your original question was about the council's role in money, and so we have to legislate. We'll be lawmakers, and we talk about oversight quite often, and that's totally necessary. But we have to have citizens included in the process in writing laws that they want to see passed. So I would say the chief role in terms of money is legislating, allocating responsibly and such, and of course with the oversight, allowing the people to tell the story as well.
Patrick Mara, you and then Alyssa Silverman, specifically on the use you see for constituent service funds.
Sure, they are, as somebody has noted in the past, or we've all noted in the past, these are really their big slush funds. I think to use the excuse to use these funds to pay for utility bills, it's very difficult to means test a situation paying for utility bills. These are the types of activities that should be handled in the executive through specific programs so that we can identify true need. And I think right now, constituent services funds are primarily more for political purposes.
You'd get rid of them altogether?
I'd like to get rid of them altogether.
Alyssa Silverman?
So I think this is where oversight plays a role, because when you look at how constituent service funds have been used, they haven't largely been used for helping people with funeral assistance and rent assistance and utility assistance. They've been used for other things. Now, when Councilmember Grasso was elected in November, he appointed me or asked me to lead a task force for him on ethics. And one of the things we suggested is getting rid of privately raised constituent service funds, because it's just a means to buy access to the council. What we alternatively suggested, and this was part of a group exercise, is that there will be a line item in the budget for the council that all council members can access to use for those real emergency needs, like rent assistance, like utility assistance, and that there be parameters put on the use of those funds.
Patrick Matt? Wait a minute.
Kojo, actually, let me address what Anita talked about, which is, one of the first things that I did when I got to the DC Fiscal Policy Institute was opened up the budget negotiations to the public. I do, one of my main aims as a reporter and as a budget analyst has been getting the public more involved in the most important decisions that we make. So before, as you both know, when we got down to the last weeks of the budget, those key decisions about our priorities as a city were made behind closed doors. And I led a coalition of groups to actually open that up to the public so the public can see how decisions are made. I think getting the public involved is very important, because part of the problem down at the Wilson Building is it's sort of a 13-member exclusive club.
And then just to follow up with that, do you think that your work with the Fiscal Policy Institute, that organization should be registered as a lobbyist with the city, considering all the advocacy work that it does?
Well, I actually agree with that. And I do think we should be registered as a lobbyist, yes.
And just another lobbyist question. Lobbyists as fundraisers. Now, I know Anita, I was checking out your schedule later this week. You're meeting with David Wilmont, who is one of the top lobbyists in D.C., represents Walmart, pharmaceutical, beverage industries. And this happens every campaign.
AT&T, everyone. Yeah.
Candidates have fundraisers with lobbyists. Do you think that is a problem, and do you think that contributes to any of the problems we're seeing today?
The problem of perception, particularly.
Perception, yes.
How about the real reality of it? Let's talk to the reality of it. Forget perception.
Anita Bonds.
All right, thanks a lot. Okay, the reality of it is it probably is perceptionally it is a issue because we've been talking this afternoon a lot about corruption and this whole arena of what is ethical, what is not. But the reality is that lobbyists are individuals who, like anyone else who is a voter in the District of Columbia, expresses their opinion. The side of the coin I think we have to be concerned with is what does the elected official do with that lobbyist and with the funds that come in through a lobbyist effort. And the funds that come in through the lobbyist effort go for everything that you usually use on a campaign. Nothing extraordinary for the mailings, et cetera, et cetera. The input that you get from a lobbyist is the financial wherewithal in order to do a campaign. Campaigns are expensive. Consultants cost. Paper is expensive, as we all know. So I'm really saying that because a lobbyist contributes to your campaign does not mean that you're where the lobbyist is. And the lobbyist is not necessarily trying to buy you. The lobbyist is saying, hey, I like what I see and I think that you look like a winner. In the District of Columbia, everyone wants to be with a winner, first and foremost. And so that has a lot to do with the perception that you're getting out there.
The perception of David Wilmot is that he is the ultimate insider in Washington. He is not only a lobbyist, he does contracts with the city. He's been known to be friendly with former mayors of the city. When you are going to an event that is sponsored by somebody like David Wilmot, it only increases the perception that he is indeed the ultimate insider. Don't you have to take some extra steps to prove that this is not going to influence what you do? Because frankly, everybody around this table knows that name because everybody says that's the go-to guy in this city.
Most definitely, David Wilmot is the go-to guy in many circles. You're correct about that. That's a fair perception. But also, David Wilmot and whatever his enterprises are will require 7 votes on the council. I would be one of 7 votes if I were voting on any measure that related to his enterprises. And so that would be my consideration. I think as a member of the council, you have to always remember that you're under the glass dome, and that what you do certainly gives the impression to people as to what your thinking is about the community.
I'm hearing mumbled responses of shock and horror on this side of the table coming from, it looks like, Patrick Merrill.
Well, I was just a little surprised that you said you would be one of 7 votes for David Wilmot, and that surprised me.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I said in order for David Wilmot to get anything through the council, he needs 7 votes, majority of the votes.
So he just has to buy 7 council members and 7 won. So, and I'm sure he can afford to do that. Listen, I've been asked to met with lobbyists.
Do you equate making a contribution as buying a council member?
Well, I've told developers and lobbyists that they are free to contribute to my campaign, but in exchange, they're going to get bupkis. And they looked up that word, a Yiddish word in the dictionary, and it means beans or nothing.
So have they been contributing heavily to your campaign?
Well, you can look at my sheet. You're going to see I haven't received 1 contribution from either a lobbyist or a developer. It's pay to play. They're not giving. I'm not so vain to think that they would give to me because they like the way I look or like any of my programs. They're buying influence, and once I told them that I'm not selling influence, they've gone elsewhere. So I have none. As far as oversight,
let me ask somebody who's raised a lot of money, Matthew Fruman. What is your position on this? People feel that you've raised a significant amount of money from people who might be in a position to influence you.
Well, I've raised a fair amount of money from many people from different perspectives, and I think I've raised the money that I've raised because people believe I do a good job and I'm fair. I've raised money from people who have supported different projects and people who have opposed different projects. I think our main thing on the council is you need to go out and raise money from people who believe in you, not because you're going to do something for them, but because they see a record of accomplishment, and then you need to behave honorably going forward. One of the things that we can do in this area, though, is the kind of campaign finance reform that has been proposed to try to make it so that lower dollar donations are more important. You can include matching of low dollar donations. The idea that people are bought for the kinds of donations that are made now, I don't think that's the case. I think it is the case when you get into bundling, when you get into the kind of multiple LLCs, but we can protect our system from the perception of corruption by making lower dollar donations more important so people do not believe that people are being bought.
Patrick Madden.
And just on the issue of lobbyists, I know, Pat, I mentioned this to you before, but you used to work on the Hill as a lobbyist, and I know you dispute the House lobbying report that says you worked for Exxon.
Yes.
And a Las Vegas casino.
Yes. Yes, I do.
Can you talk about sort of what your experience on the Hill as a lobbyist in regards to this whole discussion, and sort of what experience that has given you to become a council member?
Sure, it's given me a very unique perspective because I was able to observe the whole Abramoff situation and what that did, and you could kind of see how he was seriously influencing people. And I do believe, right now we really don't do a good job in the Wilson Building of monitoring things like gifts, lunches, dinners. I mean, how many of these things are undisclosed by council members? I think that we probably do need something like almost a law that would limit it to not even a cup of coffee, because it seems to me there are people who are receiving gifts and other forms of contributions, free legal work, as that came up before. I mean, these are the types of things that we have to be taking a harder look. But we are so far back on where we should be. We need to evolve in a way where we're a much more cleaner, more open DC government. And some of this, oddly enough, we can almost. I was talking to a member of Congress, and they were asking me, well, I don't understand why people have outside jobs. And this was so foreign. And so we have a long ways to go in terms of what we do, not only from the contributor standpoint, but on the lobbying side as well.
We only have a few minutes left in this first hour, and I'd like to use it in a slightly different way. If I were to ask you, Elissa Silverman, one question that you would most like to ask another panelist in this discussion, who would that question be addressed to, and what would it be?
I would ask Mr. Mara, why he remains in the Republican Party if he says that he's a progressive and that he's independent-minded. Why he remains in the Republican Party when someone else in our city who was a Republican, who felt like the party no longer represented him on social issues,
David Catania,
exactly, decided to actually leave the party.
Respond to the former loose
absolutely. There's two things you can do. You can either just drop out, or you can change things. And what I've done is I've completely started to change things, because I said before, we now have marriage equality in our platform. We have full voting representation in our party platform. And I've done things that have upset people. For example, I endorsed Sekou Biddle in the Democratic primary a year ago because I saw this vote split thing happening. While I am a socially progressive, fiscally responsible, moderate Republican, I don't have a problem with being bipartisan. I don't have a problem with working with others. And look, I am that socially progressive urban Republican, and we're starting something new here. We're kind of setting an example for the rest of the nation.
Anita Bonds, what question would you like to put to another panelist in this discussion, and who would that be?
I think I'd like to ask Ms. Silverman a question about her progressiveness. She has made it very clear to voters that she's the progressive candidate, and I'd like to know what definition is she using to be the progressive candidate when their Democrats have traditionally been progressives.
So I think it's thanks for the question, Anita. I think it's supporting things like paid sick leave, being very clear that I believe that workers in our city deserve to have a day off when they feel sick. And that's a difference, I think, between many of the folks at this table. This came up before, and as you mentioned, Kojo. The Republican primary in 2008 was largely revolved around this issue of paid sick days. And Mr. Mayor won that primary over Carol Schwartz, who supported a paid sick days law. Now there is an exemption in that law which exempted tip restaurant workers, and I support amending that law to include tip restaurant workers, because I believe people who serve our food deserve to have a day off when they're not feeling sick, and that they shouldn't be fired for it. And also, I think it's a public health issue. I also support the living wage bill that Perry Red talked about earlier, which is requiring big box stores to pay a living wage that can support their families. That's what I believe
Anita Bonds,
is a
that
progressive.
you don't support paid sick leave, and that you don't support the living wage.
I'm listening. And I have gone on record in support of living wage and sick leave, yes. So that's why I was a little confused.
So
Matthew
for paid
Fruman
restaurant
asked somebody a
workers?
question.
Yes.
Well, mine's a little more specific. I thought I saw a reference, Pat Mara, that you had contributed $999 to the Romney campaign, and it puzzled me. Why $999, and why Mitt Romney over Barack Obama? But most important, the $999.
Patrick Mara.
Oh, everyone is engaging me in the discussion today. Well, I mean, this is kind of what it's been like for the last few weeks, because I've just been focused on talking with voters, focusing on my message of education reform, being that fiscal and ethical watchdog on the council.
You're not going to answer that question, are you?
I mean, everyone is sending out emails, fundraising on my behalf. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, and they just want to make me out to be this monster, but I'm not. I'm always going to do what's in the best interest of the District of Columbia. Now, look, I supported the guy who lost. I don't know that there's anyone in the district who believed that President Obama would fall short in D.C. And like I said before, we're trying to really make this an urban model. I've always admired folks like Cory Booker and Michael Bloomberg, and we're doing something different in the District of Columbia. And I've been like I've said before, I've been a leading advocate on the board of DC Vote to make sure that we change things here in the district, and that we're not second, third class citizens.
Got to take a break. They're all here, and they will be back next hour. Anita Bonds, Matthew Fruman, Patrick Mara, Perry Red, Alyssa Silverman, Paul Zuckerberg, my co-moderator Patrick Madden of WAMU 88.5 News, and yours truly will continue this debate next hour for the at-large seat on the DC City Council. On the DC Council, I'm Kojo and WAMU.